All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Special thanks to all of the hosts of this incredible Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Week. My name is Dr. Wando Olaiwola. I'm Chair and Professor of the Department of Family Medicine, and so honored to be able to speak with you all today. And very excited to speak with my colleague, Autumn Glover, who I'll let introduce herself briefly, and then we'll go into some of the details on the Anti-Racism Action Plan. Autumn, do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself as well?
Yes, good morning. My name is Autumn Glover. I have the pleasure of working with Dr. Wando and others. And again, thank you all for inviting us to share some of this important work. I work in government affairs and community relations for our health system. And I also am the president of our nonprofit affiliate PACT on the Near East Side.
Great. So we're here today to really, we want to kind of set the stage for some of the work that's going on, but also make sure we hear from our students and our learners about how this anti-racism action plan can best serve you and how it can really meet your needs. And so what we'll do is we'll walk you through a little bit about what's happened since June 18th when we had the kind of all medical center and health science college town hall hosted by Dr. Hal Paz, where Autumn, Dr. Leah McDougall, Dr. Daryl Gray, Dr. Joshua Joseph, and myself shared with Dr. Paz, Dr. Clinshot, Allison Mincy, and others, the Anti-Racism Action Plan. Since that time, we've done a tremendous amount of work launching and building out the structure of what this will actually look like. So we're going to share that, introduce some of it to you today, and then have some time for discussion at the end with you all. So to start, Autumn, you can go ahead. We want to just make sure that we level set here. You know, we've been really, really happy to see the recent outrage against racism, and specifically that our university, our medical center, and our health sciences colleges, and many other towns and communities and county systems throughout Central and the rest of Ohio, but also across the nation, have formally come out to denounce racism and call racism a social determinant of health, and also declare racism a public health crisis. And so we know that this is a foundational moment in time because we have to first acknowledge structural and systemic racism if we're going to be able to get any changes in health and health equity. And so we feel that as we have done that, it's great. And I think you guys will all agree, it's great to see these declarations and these denouncements and the outrage about racism that has been brought to the forefront by, you know, the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many others. But it's also important that we move into action. And so Autumn and I feel just enormously honored to have been asked to help in this next phase, which is action, and how we're going to improve the way we educate you all, how we engage with our communities, funding policies and all of our practices to really accelerate our efforts around removing systemic and structural racism. So that's what we're here to do. And we're really excited that we've got this opportunity at this moment. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So as you might have heard in the official kind of launch of the Anti-Racism Action Plan, which is a plan that is being commissioned by our chancellor, Dr. Hal Paz, and has charged an oversight committee, which is being co-chaired by Autumn and myself, and a number of different oversight group members. This involves the entire medical center and all of the 7 health sciences colleges. So that includes College of Medicine, Nursing, Dentistry, Pharmacy, Optometry, Vet Med, Public Health. I hope I didn't miss any one of them, and the allied health schools as well. But all of these health sciences colleges are aligning to say that we're going to elevate the cause around anti-racism. We're going to be engaging our faculty, our staff, our students, our patients, our communities. And you heard a little bit more about community engagement in the last lecture with Dr. Rastetter and Autumn as well. Being able to equip all of our team members with not just the rhetoric around anti-racism action, but also like what tools, what resources do you need to be able to move forward, to report problems, to innovate around anti-racism efforts, and to move us forward. We're also working to find ways to empower all of our employees, our staff, our students, our patients to address racism, and then making a strong commitment to evaluating our efforts and reviewing them and making sure that we continue to re-engineer efforts if we are headed in the wrong direction, or react to the data that we find, but making sure that an evaluation component is a very strong part of our anti-racism action plan. So those are the main kind of, we call them the E's, you know, elevate, engage, equip, empower, and evaluate, but those are the main components of the plan. We can go on to the next slide. So there's a lot of meat on this slide, and I definitely don't want to go through all of it because we want to really spend time hearing your reactions to certain things. But I think it's worth calling out a few things because it's very important that you all understand where we're hoping you might engage and how we might best engage, particularly our student and our resident trainee learners in this process. So we believe that to really get health equity, we have to eliminate a number of different negative social determinants of health, and racism being one of them. And to do that, we've got to really start to have conversations that have been difficult historically and that make people uncomfortable, but we're getting comfortable making people uncomfortable, I think, at this moment in time. And a lot of the national climate has allowed us to be able to do that. So one of the things that we're going to be launching next month are a series of roundtables on actions against racism, which is being organized by our Health Equity Steering Committee, which is co-chaired by Autumn Glover and Dr. Daryl Gray, who many of you know. And in those roundtables, we're going to be working with institutional leaders, but also community leaders and partners that are going to be having really critical conversations around what we can do in action-oriented solutions to addressing racism and how we can implement those in our environment, and really pushing us to take these conversations from roundtables to action, to policies, to practices that change our work on a day-to-day basis. We also are re-engineering some of our strategic goals and our strategic vision statements for the medical center of the health sciences colleges, making sure that we not only acknowledge racism as social determinant of health, but making the elimination of racism an important part of our strategic mission, our vision, and our values. There are many other things that we're going to be doing in terms of looking at every single institutional policy through an anti-racism lens and making sure that we are building in anti-racism protections in our process of selecting students, of selecting residents, of advancing and searching for new faculty, for promotion and hiring. So making sure a lot of our hiring practice and other policy decisions are really, really looked at through a lens of anti-racism to ensure that we don't continue to perpetuate the very problem that we're trying to fix. The other thing we're going to do under the Engage pillar is continue to have a series of anti-racism town halls, listening sessions. We think it's very important to hear from all of our different constituents, and we've got a number of constituents. So being a large academic health center and a coalition of health sciences colleges puts us in a position where we have a number of different students that are our constituents. We have patients that are our constituents. We have communities that are constituents, but we have a diversity of staff and faculty as well. So we want to make sure that everybody feels heard. And we've already kicked off a number of these town hall and listening sessions just to get more ideas that can help us formulate and advance this plan. Another thing that we think is really important, it falls under the Engage, but also falls under the Empower, is creating a culture in which we can all feel very comfortable calling out racism when we see it, when we feel it, when we experience actions or inactions that are wrought with racism or bigotry or discrimination, and being able to give people a mechanism through which they can actually stop rounds if they feel like someone just said something that was inappropriate and made them uncomfortable as a student. Whether you're a student on the team, whether you're an attending on the team, we want everybody to feel comfortable. You could be a surgical tech in the OR, or you could be the surgeon themselves, and we want you to feel comfortable being able to stop everything if you feel like something racist or discriminatory has happened to you or to your colleagues or to your patients. And so it's a very, very important thing that we're trying to do. It's a real cultural change to be able to get this right. And we're going to adapt some of what we've seen from other patient safety and quality initiatives to the anti-racism efforts as well. Also just, working on partnering with community organizations, as Autumn talked about in the last talk, that have actually taken formal actions against racism. We think it's very important that our alignment and our engagement with community partners is reflective of the mission that we espouse. And so we cannot say that we are pushing forward an anti-racism agenda and then we're partnering and supporting organizations that do the opposite. So really being thoughtful in those commitments and those partnerships. Under the Equip pillar, we're talking about really making sure that people have the tools and the resources that they need to be able to do this work. So many of you know, and this will not be a surprise to you, about what's often called the minority tax or the cultural tax, where in institutions of higher learning and many other environments, the onus of fixing or rectifying problems around diversity and equity and inclusion and racism and gender discrimination and sexual orientation discrimination, those burdens are often placed on the people in that identify with those particular groups. And what ends up happening is that in many times, in many situations, you don't have the strength in numbers. So you can't just say, well, we need an African American to take on the anti-racism work. Well, you might not have that many to choose from. And what happens is the same 4 or 5 people will tend to take on that work and just be taxed constantly with having to carry out all the things related to that endeavor. So we're looking at how do we make sure that we equip a lot of people across the institution, the medical center, the health science colleges, to advance this work. And it's not just going to be a small group of people that are committed, but that every single department chair, every unit leader, every team leader, every kind of institutional senior leader will have some responsibility in making sure that we are addressing these issues, but also have resources and tools to be able to do that. So one of the things that we're really excited about is a Health Equity Institute that's going to lead and be funded to lead and advise a lot of the efforts that are going on around this, continuing to invest in some of the great work that you saw in the last lecture with Autumn and Dr. Rastetter around programs and initiatives such as PACT, our Partners Achieving Community Transformation, and the work that they've been doing in really building and strengthening our communities, and then continuing to fund and expand the work that's being done by our Health Equity Steering Committee, our Diversity Council, and also a lot of the work that's been done by Dr. Quinn Capers in his implicit bias training. And then finally, under empowering, we really want to make sure that we are using our position as thought leaders and as trusted partners in our communities to provide opportunities for social advocacy. And we know that a lot of ways to do that are really making sure that, obviously we talked about, reviewing our policies, but engaging with our communities in things like voter registration and community outreach, and how do we get people to engage in the civic parts of life that ultimately influence health and healthcare. And I would say that under all of this is really the E that's not necessarily explicitly stated here, but built into all this is the education. So one thing that we are actively aware of is that you are all learning in our environments, and we have a responsibility to make sure that what we teach you aligns with what is true and what is our core value, and what our educational climate looks like. We want to make sure the climate reflects the experience that we want you all to have. We feel absolutely awful if we hear that any student feels that they are not given kind of the full opportunity to learn in a climate that's safe and healthy and encouraging for them because of their race or ethnicity or their gender or their sexual orientation or their religion. We feel that the opportunity to learn and to thrive as a medical student, as a health professional student in any of our colleges is a right. And we want to make sure that we create the right climate for you all to do well and to succeed. And we know that by having you do that, you'll go on and you'll make great doctors and nurses and veterinarians and optometrists and everything else that you're studying, and that you will start to foster when you're teaching what you saw and what you learned in our environment. So we feel very strongly about the importance of the educational climate being absolutely right to be able to carry out our anti-racism efforts. We can go on to the next one. So I'm gonna start to transition this over to Autumn, because really what we wanted to do with this was not really spend an hour talking at you about all these initiatives, but really hearing from you about how we can really create an anti-racist learning environment and foster a lot of the principles around diversity, equity, inclusion that we all agree to and that we espouse, and recognize that maybe not everyone does agree with what we're talking about and what we're saying, and how do we bring those folks along in their educational journey and in the curriculum. So what Autumn's going to do is really talk with you a little bit more about how we have structured the anti-racism action efforts so that we can best meet the needs of all of the different constituents that we talked about, and make sure that we are focusing on discrete action and moving the needle forward. So I'll turn it over to Autumn, and I'm looking forward to discussing some next steps with you all at the end.
Great. Thank you. So I'll just touch on this a little bit because I really want to give acknowledgement to Dr. Dan Clinshot, who really heard the call loud and clear from both students, faculty, and staff around the way that we can improve our learning environment, as well as all of our health sciences deans. Everyone wants to look at the curriculum. So as we're evaluating all of our policies, we're also looking at our curriculum. And I just want to underscore something that was just said, that, we want to make sure that you're learning what's true and factual. about the history and the context. This moment in time has really elevated the discussion around the history of systemic racism, but we also want to make sure that our curriculum calls that out. And so that's going to be an important part. And all of you, we welcome you, both white students, Black students, and everyone else as well, to engage in this process and this conversation. And so some of that work will happen very directly with you as students in your colleges, but then also really converging and aligning with this anti-racism work. So, you know, I think if I were ever to write a paper for a PhD and go down that track, I would write a paper around governance. And so what you should know, and one thing that I would say is very important, is the governance to do this work. So again, it's one thing to say that we're committed to it. It's another thing to make a list of actions that we could take, but we also have to embed this into our work. And so we're really fortunate, again, that our chancellor, Dr. Paz, really stepped up and said, we must do this. And I want this to be organized in this way that, one, both honors and leverages our existing efforts. And so, you know, Wando said a few weeks ago on Twitter that no academic medical institution gets an A+, which is absolutely true. We own where we are today, but I will say where we are today at Ohio State is leveraging some work that's already been done. And so Dr. Paz was very clear from the beginning that we wanted to look at our diversity council, which for some of you who aren't aware, internally, it's a very staff-facing council that's focused on issues of diversity and inclusion and equity. And then our health equity steering committee that's mostly externally facing. And so both of these groups have done exceptional work, but really we have been called to go even further. And so both of those groups will be intimately engaged in this governance structure. But just like at PACT, we had a governance structure, and anything that you do, if you don't plan for how you're going to do it and how you're going to make decisions, you're never going to get to a place of effectiveness. And so I hope that seeing an org chart gives you confidence that we're moving forward in this direction. And actually, you all are seeing something that a lot of our faculty and staff will see again tomorrow. So as was shared, you know, we will continue to have these conversations and think about what's the right approach. And so really at the top of this is our executive sponsor, Dr. Paz, really wanting to have ongoing, intense engagement in this work and recognizing that there are great ideas and needs and questions all throughout our organization, and the diversity of our organization really moves us to be thinking boldly about that. The other thing too is that there has to be some accountability to this work. And so that's why this engagement is important, to have this governance. So this oversight committee that we will co-chair includes leaders across our organization from both the health science colleges, the medical center, the health sciences, the medical center, and the James as well. And that's really important, that we understand that this is all of our work, and we have to approach this together. So I'll share with you some of these action teams, importantly named action teams, because these aren't going to be groups of people who will just discuss these efforts. We already have these standing committees. These are going to be the groups that put forward the implementation of this work. And so very important is education and training. This is one that, you know, we definitely want to get your input. This committee is going to look at things like the longitudinal approach to how Ohio State recruits Black and other underrepresented minority talent, and how we're ensuring that we're building a pathway for people to end up in your seats. That it's not by accident that we end up with students from different underrepresented minority backgrounds in particular, because those are the backgrounds that are experiencing systemic racism. But it's not by accident, but it's by intention that we create a pathway for them to get to Ohio State and really be in a position to choose Ohio State. So that's both our Health Sciences Academy students on the Near East Side. It's also thinking about our Metro School partnership, anything we do pre-K to 12, how does that connect to work that is happening in our Office of Diversity and Inclusion across the institution? And then how does that feed you as residents and students and other trainees to make sure that you're getting the mentoring and the support that you need? This committee will also look at curriculum and those sorts of things. So I'm going to go through the rest of these these action teams. And then we really want to have some dialogue with you all about, what's missing. We know what we know from our perspective, but your perspective is incredibly important to us as we roll this out. So employee engagement and advancement is really important as well. As an organization, we have to take care of home first, right? And so we need to look at what's happening with our faculty and staff, which is really starting with the data. What is the data telling us about advancement in our institution and opportunity and career pathways for our faculty and staff? And what are the things that they need? Diversity Council, our employee resource groups, human resources. Allison Mincy will be involved in leading and championing this group, she's the leader of our HR, and really thinking about how we support our faculty and staff along the continuum. Policy and advocacy is also really important. And so we can do a lot to solve problems, those downstream impacts that we're seeing. We can provide housing and make connections to the food bank, for example. But what we really want to do is leverage our position as a leader in our community to solve the actual problem. So why do we need food banks? We need to be having those levels of conversations as an institution and really leveraging that. And so we have faculty within our Department of Family and Community Medicine, our Government Affairs group and others who are really going to help us move the ball in this way. One, other important piece there is around kind of how our communities are connecting to the internet. How does that allow them to continue education during a pandemic and access telehealth services? And we shared already a little bit about voter registration, but what can we be doing leveraging our position as an institution to help advance policy that eliminates the challenges that have been enabled by systemic racism? Population health and community engagement. We'll talk a little bit about some of those ideas and really get some of your thoughts, but really thinking about how do we engage with the community and creating strategies that solve problems for them. The other piece to this is faculty staff training and development. And so we need to create those modules for people to learn and really to expand their knowledge base on some of these topics. And so again, there's tons of great groundwork. Dr. Quinn Capers is going to help lead and champion some of this work. And so we really need to be thinking about how we're empowering our staff with information. External partnerships and resources. How do we fund this work? And who else is doing some of these things? So I'll give you an example of one of those. Franklin County was one of the first municipalities in Central Ohio to really declare racism as a public health crisis. They've been working for more than a year on a poverty mitigation plan. And so part of that plan at the county level is that they're going to implement an innovation center. We need to be thinking as an institution, how do we dovetail, align, and partner with efforts that are happening in the surrounding community for leverage and impact? So that's one thing that this action team will be looking at. Patient experience and clinical services. How does all of this translate into the clinical environment? How will our patients know that we're intentional and investing in this work? How will they express their concerns to us? And so we have great leadership around patient experience, but how do we take that to the next level to make sure that the groups that are advising us, the patient populations, are representative of who we serve, and that everybody feels like they have the opportunity to give input, but also that it's a safe space for them to come into. Additionally, for our faculty and staff, we don't want anybody to be in a position where maybe they're experiencing racism, both in the clinical environment, maybe it's an interaction with patients. And we'll tell you today, we're not actually sure how that happens. And so we need to look at that. And we need to make sure, again, that we're equipping our faculty and our staff with what they need. And then finally, I'll mention just, obviously communications, how we do that. We're going to share the website where this is going to be uploaded. But, developing those toolkits for both external and internal audiences. Together with that one, and probably one of the most important pieces of this, Dr. Paz has really commanded that we must evaluate this work on an ongoing basis. And so that Health Equity Institute and the Health Equity Steering Committee is really going to lead an annual health equity and anti-racism report, where we're going to report out on what the work of these action teams are doing. And we're going to do that very transparently to both the community we serve and to internal audiences. So before I move on from this, Wanda, is there anything you want to add to this?
No, I think this is great.
Okay. Okay. So this is an ongoing process. This literally just launched 2 weeks ago. So on June 18th, we initiated this process. We're in the process now. I mean, you all are really seeing new work. I mean, we just developed these action teams within the last 7 days, and we'll be sending out invitations and nomination opportunities for faculty and staff who are members of our Health Equity Steering Committee, our Diversity Council, our employee resource groups, as well as faculty and staff and students who are otherwise interested. Those groups will develop plans to implement some of the ideas and others that may be born out of their working teams. And then we will start evaluating them. So I think it's important for us to really underscore that this is ongoing, and this is just the beginning. It is all of our work as an institution. We are a large organization, and so we have an opportunity to lead the way, but it's going to require us to spend some time really having those conversations and dialogue to really understand what everyone needs and what they're facing. And so you will always hear us asking for feedback and input and other ideas. We want to know what's working well, what's not, where there are blind spots, and ideas are definitely welcome. So I think just the illustration of this timeline is that it's ongoing, and it will be reported regularly. So I said this, but evaluation is extremely important. It's one way that we really put our money where our mouth is, if you will, and really look at, what is the impact? What are the results for our patients, for our students, for our faculty and staff? We also are looking at developing enterprise-wide scorecard metrics to really call all of our leaders and our managers to the table to help with this. And so really wanting to measure that. The action teams will be involved in helping to develop those metrics. And we will of course correct as things are working or not working. And so again, this is a living process. It's not set in stone, but I think we're so proud and honored that we're at this place where we're starting this work, and we're gonna really build the bridge as we walk across it, but recognizing that we're trying to build on a foundation that's gonna take us to sustainability and eliminating these everywhere we look at. Everywhere we turn in our organization. So, our communications team has done a fabulous job of putting together tools on our Health Hub. They've set up a website, which is listed here. That's externally facing, so anybody can see that. Whenever something new is developed, it's going to go up on that website and we'll communicate it widely. In addition to the action teams, we will also ensure that there are other ways for people to engage in this work. And so there will be periodic times where we may put something out for reaction and that sort of thing. So with that, we really want to hear from you all and your questions. What's missing? What would you prioritize? What needs to happen first? Are there stakeholders that we're missing that we should be engaging? And we'll take it from there. So.
Yeah, thanks, Autumn. So let me. I got a chance to look at a couple of the questions and comments that came in. So one of the comments is really about something we talked about a little earlier, which is that kind of like the minority tax we were speaking about, where the students, from the student perspective, the folks that kind of engage in the conversations about diversity, inclusion, equity, anti-racism, is still such a small segment of the class. And when it's considered to be optional, then if people don't necessarily subscribe to the concern that these are problems, how do we create a kind of a shared sense of value and attention on these issues if you don't necessarily have the force behind you? And so I think, Autumn and I can both feel free to comment on that. But as I saw that comment come in, I was thinking to myself, and there's another, there's another question that came in also. So I think these two kind of go together, because someone mentioned that earlier this week, the lecturers that were part of your Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Week did talk about the history of racism and racial awareness overall, but also in medicine, and how can we incorporate that history into medical education curriculum. So taking those two together, I'll say that, I think we spend a lot of time in things like embryology and understanding kind of the genesis of human biology as we're in medical school, learning about things that we ultimately will be treating. And I think that we have to pay a similar amount of attention to the genesis of racism in this country and kind of the construct of race as a false construct that was designed to really keep a group of people down. And I think that has to be given really equal attention to understand a lot of things that we ultimately treat as we would embryology. So I use embryology as an example because it really is that kind of genesis of the human from a biological perspective. But one of the things that I was really happy to hear Dr. Dan Clinshot speak about when he started to talk about, his thoughts about a higher level look at all of the education and the curricula and starting to put together the work groups that are going to focus on what you are all learning, is that I don't think that, education around health disparities, health equity, racism, and the influence that has had on health and healthcare should be optional. And I think as we're working for it, it's because otherwise they'll just still get the same people that kind of already understand it to take it. So when I know we'll be successful is when that is just built into the kind of the construct of the education, not only in medical school, but all the other health sciences colleges. And so I'm hoping that we're going to move the needle towards that kind of effort as we look at educational reform as part of this process. Adam, do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
I would just add that, in thinking about the question, and part of the framing of it was around kind of how to address the apathy of some students or that sort of thing. I think one of the things that she just shared, one is that it's going to be required. And so it's going to be a part of the curriculum, and that there is that foundational education around the history, because facts are facts. I think the other thing though, too, is as a society, as we're having these conversations around unlearning some things and changing kind of really our perspective on things, we have to just own our individual impact, right? And so individually, it's not my ministry to try to change people's hearts, right? That happens over time. And so we just have to understand that that's work that happens over time, and that's their individual choice. But institutionally, policy really changes behavior. And I think that's the most important piece to this, is that we're creating an environment in our institution that really commands a change in behavior. And so again, I'm not going to try to change hearts, and I definitely understand what that feels like, to be in a space where it's clear that people don't have those same core values. But I'm also faithful that people can evolve. And so some of that evolution may happen in the change of policy that may come out of this plan. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, great. There's another comment about, just again, on pulling that same thread, that to really become anti-racist, you have to know the history, and incorporating the development of racial identity is necessary in the curriculum. And the person who mentioned this said that they've been part of this work with another organization. I'm not sure if this is something you want to share here publicly, but we would love to know what organization you've been working with, because I think that to the extent that we have the ability to tap into work that's already been done about how you create educational reform around these topics, we'd like to pass that on to Dr. Clinshot and the team that's working on education. So I don't know if the person would like to speak up about that and share a little bit about what that work looks like, so we can maybe have some ideas to pass on.
Sure. This is Dr. Jennifer Walton. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes, you can.
I'm the one that put in this question, and I thank you for taking my question. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician, and within our society on DBPEDS, we have what's called the RACE card, the Race and Educational Collaborative among us developmental behavioral providers. This is an initiative we've actually started almost 3 years ago, addressing how can we be more appropriate anti-racist health providers in medical education and in the patient care we do. And so we've created a curriculum, a variety of different lectures, and have presented this in a couple national audiences and forums. And so I already have additional information. I tried to sort of put that into one of the previous lectures we did earlier this week with the group of us regarding the history of racism, the development of racial identity. We focus more on racial awareness, but that is another separate piece. But I think that all goes to the part of behavior reflecting development. And if we want behavior change, you're right, policy is very huge, as well as addressing the developmental foundation. And so I'm happy to contribute or help out Dr. Clinshot and the steering committee on addressing these concerns, as well as other colleagues from Nationwide Children's.
We welcome that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's fabulous work. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we'd love to be able to see what you've got and be able to pass that on to the groups that are working. Awesome. And again, I will just put that out there that if there are other folks that have experience doing some of this work and thinking through the various work groups that Autumn presented, please do let us know. I have a question that came in by text, so I'm gonna look at my phone real quick. Question is about what reforms are going to be made at the department level. And so that's a very good question. I'm glad that has been asked. I think it's really important, actually, especially for me as a chair, to weigh in here. Dr. McDougall, our Chief Diversity Officer, met with all of the chairs in the College of Medicine a couple of weeks ago and laid out kind of, I think it was 9 or 10 specific points that he wanted every chair to be able to execute on. And it was actually a really thoughtful way of presenting very tactical, tangible things that we could be doing as chairs. And so some of those things were just really taking a look at our own data. Where are we in terms of diversity, ethnicity, equity, inclusion in our departments? Looking at how are our search committees composed, and what kind of balance do we have in terms of gender and thought and race, ethnicity, and the way we search. What kind of intention do we put around diversifying our faculty, our staff, our workforce? How do we go about selecting residents? And what does that selection process look like? What inherent biases do we potentially have in that process that we need to rectify? What policies do we have that might be prohibitive for growth and development of certain people? So I'll give you an example from my department and the Department of Family Medicine. We are Family and Community Medicine, I should say. We are just starting to look at some of the data around our own promotion and advancement of faculty, women faculty, and racial, ethnic minority, underrepresented minority faculty as well. And have realized that we tend to have our underrepresented minority faculty are stuck at the kind of the lower faculty ranks and stuck there for years, and in some cases decades. And we know that really internally we've got to do some work around, what are the barriers to getting those folks to advance, and so those are the kind of things that we're all going to be asked to look at. Another thing that has come up has been the clinical experience for students. So as and I'm speaking mostly about the medical students for whom we have the most interaction. You rotate through the different departments, and so many students rotate through surgery or family community medicine or internal medicine. Or plastics or ophthalmology or whatever clinical services that you're going through, and have had some really awful experiences. And I'm sad when I hear about them, but students have reported hearing things that are being said by attendings or by residents or by staff or by their fellow students about patients, about other people that are on those teams, and what can actually happen there in terms of what you see in terms of how we treat our patients and our staff and everything. And so we think that a lot of that role modeling has to come really directly from us, and that change has to come from us. I met with some of my residents a couple weeks ago and asked them some of the questions we're asking you all, and they were saying that sometimes we don't feel empowered to say anything, and we hear some of the attendings say some things that we don't understand or we don't agree with, and we don't know if we're at the levels where we're interns or we're whatever, we're lower in the kind of the medical hierarchy and don't feel like we're empowered to say things. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to address, is that one, we want to create a climate where people have understanding and the awareness that Dr. Walton just mentioned, so that they look at things differently, and we want to do that. But at the same time, that takes time, and so we want to make sure we create the right climate. And so some of the things like the Stop the Line work are efforts that we're going to be undertaking to make sure that you can feel safe and be able to speak up in those moments, or have someone else speak up on your behalf as an ally when things like that come up. Autumn, do you want to add anything to what we can specifically do at that level? Any additional thoughts?
No, I think you covered it. That Stop the Line for racism, I think, is very important, and just being transparent that these are things that are happening here. But we also have a responsibility to shift that culture and the climate in our institution. So Yeah, I think that covers it pretty well.
Okay. Another question is, what are our thoughts on the longevity of and the kind of the endurance of this anti-racism conversation that we're having across the country and here at Ohio State right now? Otto, maybe I'll let you have that since you've been here for quite a while. Do you think that this has is this a short sprint? Is this a marathon? Do you think that this energy will die down over time, or how? And if so, how can we keep the momentum around this going?
I don't think it will. I think we're in a very unique period of time. So I teach in our Glenn College of Public Affairs, and I often share with my students that they will one day have to answer to their children where they were in these moments. And so I reflect importantly as a parent that, I have a young child. And so I have a responsibility to be able to tell her that, I was a part of making change happen. And so that's me as an individual. I think all of us feel a pull to really shift things in a way that is a little different than what we had imagined before. There's tons of great learnings through this pandemic period that I think all of us will be talking about for decades to come. And so I don't think that this is a short-term sprint. Importantly for us at the Medical Center and the Health Science Colleges is we're building on work that has been going on. So our Diversity Council, our Health Equity Steering Committee, these are not new conversations. I think the powerful part of this moment is that it has been elevated at the leadership table as a priority. And not that it wasn't a priority before, so I don't want you to hear me saying that, but it's something that they expect us to start evaluating in a more meaningful way and in a more transparent way. So these things don't happen overnight. And now, I've been joking with friends of mine who work in the corporate sector, friends of mine work at Nike and other big organizations that made bold statements. Al Gore's internets are everywhere, right? So all of these bold statements, somebody is going to call you out. And so I also feel that there's just a moment of accountability that will come for us as a society. And if it doesn't, I implore all of you to call it out. It's not a situation where those impacted by systemic racism can own it alone. And so we're looking at both our leaders, those who have power that they can leverage and move, but frankly, those who are beneficiaries of white supremacy and other things related to systemic racism to really step up to the plate too. So I think this moment of us being really on pause in 2020 is really forcing everybody to pay attention to this differently. This is not new. Many of you are probably like me, where these are conversations you've had your entire life, but now we're all really ripping the Band-Aid off. So I am very optimistic that this will persist. It's part of the reason why one of our recommendations to our senior leaders was that we embed this in our mission and our vision and our values. This is not going away, but it's also work that will take time. And so we're really trying to repair a legacy of hurt over a period of time, and we all have a role to play. So if this is just a sprint and it's, just saying words for the sake of saying it, call it out, especially students. And as you guys are moving into these leadership roles, we're going to move out the way. And so we're going to need you to really continue this work in a meaningful way so that my child and your future children or children are experiencing a society that's better than what we see today. So
great, Autumn. I agree. I think that you guys have to hold us accountable, and I feel very encouraged by the commitment that our chancellor has made to these issues, and one of the first really strong and effective statements I think around issues that were going on nationally, and explicitly calling out and denouncing racism and white supremacy. And I think that him making sure that we've now put it out there for the whole medical center and health sciences colleges to have access to and peel away at and chop at is a very bold move. And I don't think that you don't do those kind of things unless you're planning to continue to put meat behind it. So I feel very, very encouraged by that. And there was a question in the Q&A, and I think Autumn kind of addressed it already by saying, as we start to think about what an Ohio State Wexner Medical Center and health science colleges system will look like in a few years as a result of these efforts, would it make sense to really bring people into the space at are excited about the kind of values that we have, and can we kind of more explicitly state this kind of work and effort and vision in our values. And so one of the things that we are working on is, and it was kind of an earlier part of this conversation, is retooling our mission, vision, and value statements to be more explicit about this is a focus. And so the comment is that, can we explicitly state that we're training students to build an anti-racism healthcare workforce as part of our mission? And I would just say, yes, that is one of the things, maybe not those exact words, but we're working on making sure that is reflected in the mission and value statement as well. So I think that's a great point, and agree that, you know, we want to talk with you guys about this because we know that you will hold us to it. And one of the questions that Autumn has up here is, you know, what is the best way to keep our students and our learners informed? You know, how do we make sure that you're hearing from us, and that you're getting what you need to know about what's going on, and not feeling like kind of lost in the dark. There's another question about what can faculty do, I guess this is probably faculty and staff really, to better support underrepresented minority students across the health sciences colleges. And I honestly think I would love to hear from some of our students about what we could be doing better. I think that, you know, I can certainly impose a few ideas on what we could do better, but I would love to see if there are thoughts that some of you might have on how we could better serve you and how we could, you know, kind of improve that climate. So if you have a thought on how to answer that, I mean, it'd probably be more interesting for you to hear from each other than me. Then I would love to hear any thoughts you might have, because I'm sure whoever asked the question has been thinking about that a lot. Any thoughts? And you can raise your hand, I think, and then we can unmute you if you want to talk or share some thoughts about that. All right, so I'm not sure. Well, Roseanne, I don't know if you wanted to jump in with any thoughts there. If not, I can just start to share a couple of ideas.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's honestly a really good question. And I think honestly from the student perspective, that just from stories that I've heard from upperclassmen, like what has been really impactful has been having a lot of faculty just like vouching for students to share different stories about what happens to them on rotations and things like that. So I think just having different ways that faculty can really vouch for students would be very impactful.
That's good.
Okay. Good. Any other thoughts? All right. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is probably something we need to continue to think about. And I don't know if there's any one answer to that question. We do definitely want to create a climate in which people feel safe and able to share their experience. Autumn was talking on the other call about how important lived experiences are, and how we spend a lot of time kind of emphasizing learned experiences as opposed to the lived ones, and being able to create a space in which students can share their lived experiences and kind of what has allowed them to have the identity that they have, is an important part of how we teach and how we communicate and how we connect with you. I think that's really important as well. I think that, you know, making sure students across all the different colleges know who to go to when they have issues is really important. So I've heard things about, well, I wasn't sure, should I go to the chair of the department or just go to the faculty member themselves or go to, you know, someone else, and, you know, how do I go about doing that? And so actually one of the things that on that list of bullets that Dr. McDougall gave all the chairs, one of those was to make it very clear how people report problems in your department, and make sure that's very clear. So I think creating a very clear strategy for how we communicate and address issues is important. And then I think also just engaging you in the process of these reforms. And so I know for sure Dr. Clinshot is working on making sure that the different groups and action teams that are focused on student life and student experience do involve a number of students across the board to make sure, and I believe all the other deans of the various health sciences colleges are committed to making sure that happens as well. So I think there are a number of ways that the faculty, the staff, the leadership can better support students, but it will certainly come from hearing from you all. There's another question about, so OSU HR has an anonymous reporting line for ethical concerns. And are there ways that students could potentially have this option to call out racism without fear of repercussion? So will there be some sort of anonymous line to be able to report concerns? And so Autumn, do you wanna comment on that and what
Yeah, so that happens through our Office of Institutional Equity, and I believe that our communications leads actually just added that to our Diversity Council website as well as the Anti-Racism Initiative website. And so I appreciate you, Dr. Walton, for elevating that. But the reality is a lot of faculty, staff, and students don't know that as an option and don't know how that process works. And so I think part of our action team work will be to really understand that process and think about how we improve it in a way that gives more real-time support for our faculty and staff and students, but then also really promoting that as one way to move forward. So I think it's really understanding and evaluating how that office works, but that does exist today, and it is open to everybody, faculty, staff, and students, and there's a button for that on our website today, but the awareness is not there. I've been here for 17 years and I only knew that office existed because I heard about it being created. And so I know that that awareness is missing for everyone. And so hopefully we can elevate some of those improvements that have already taken place, but then also think about how we make sure they're responsive in the way that our community is really calling for them to be. So I appreciate that.
I think one of our students had a question. I think you're unmuted, Thomas, if you wanted to, or comment rather.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Rosa's points. I really do find it helpful when faculty reach out to us. And one thing that I really appreciated were the safe spaces created for us to share our own stories and opinions. So like as a Black male in the College of Medicine, the Black Male Roundtables have been like a super inclusive space for me to just sort of voice any frustrations or just hear guidance from my peers and also like mentors, people I look up to.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's good. I've never been able to attend any of those. I've seen them on Twitter though, and it sounds like they're great. And so it'd be great to think about what other kinds of roundtables or smaller groups should we be convening or supporting you all if you wanted to convene them. If you felt like as students there were faculty or staff or leadership that you'd want to kind of be at the table with you in these more informal types of conversations, we'd love to hear that. If there are constituent groups that you feel like would just want to have those kind of sit downs like you've had, it would be great to explore that. So I think right now what you should take from this is that we're open, and as Autumn said earlier, this is a work in progress. This is an evolving plan. We are ready to pivot when we need to, ready to innovate as the situation calls for it. And so we want to really be able to make this responsive and meaningful in real time for all of you. So, keep sharing those ideas. If you have thoughts on things that we should kind of be convening to get more of the, we have that one, under one of those pillars, we spoke a lot about town halls and listening sessions. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, and probably a lot of cross sections of our stakeholders that we could be talking to. So please let us know. Just let us know, how we could do that better and who else we might want to connect to as we're going through this, and making sure we're hearing from all the voices as we're continuing to evolve the plan. Another thing that was just mentioned was that okay, so this is interesting. So this is really more of a comment, which is about when you're doing kind of your standardized patient care simulations and virtual patient experiences, someone mentioned that maybe this is subtle, but nearly all of the simulators for training and the standardized patients that you see are white and don't necessarily reflect the broader communities that you're ultimately going to be called to serve and care for. And, what is the impact of that on things? So that's really great to have that brought to our attention, and certainly would like to make sure that as we'll get that feedback back to to Dr. Clinshot and the group that's working on that from the education perspective, because that that is an important thing. And what you're seeing and the way that different communities and races and ethnicities are represented to you is very important, and the absence of them is also very important. So thank you for sharing that and giving us that feedback, and we'll certainly make sure that we cue that
There
up.
are two final questions that are somewhat connected, so I want to make sure I try to answer them, and please let us know if we didn't get it right or you still have more questions. So one of them is around kind of how we ingrain those extra readings and articles and books and that sort of thing as a part of your curriculum. That is part of that discussion that education and training action team is going to take. You all may have also heard that there is a task force that's being formed, particularly in the College of Medicine, for students to engage. And so please offer those suggestions and those comments. It should be infusing your curriculum. Some of those conversations are happening at the department level, where there are book clubs and article clubs and that sort of thing. If you have a network that you're engaged in with other students, you should do that too. So this work is both individual, it's department, it's interpersonal conversation. One of the concepts that we're thinking about, and somebody's other question about kind of going to go find those articles and how to really consume the information and do something with it. I will say to you that it's not enough to consume information and not really espouse it in your actions and your behavior. And so part of that education and training piece is going to be helping really think about how to process that. There is already a large cache in our computer-based learning of trainings that might help you with that. And so if you haven't visited those, I would encourage you to do that. The anti-racism website, as well as our OSU and College of Medicine and other health science colleges, all have tons of articles on their page. But one of the ideas that we've thought about is a common read. And so maybe we as an institution read a book together, and maybe we bring the author to campus and we have learnings around that. Obviously, many of you may have done a common read in your freshman year of college. And so really thinking about how we do that together is one of those thoughts. So I appreciate that comment. It is a lot to consume. And so I will tell you that this isn't short-term work. So you shouldn't think that you've got to read all the things while we're still dealing with the pandemic and mostly at home, but just pace yourself in thinking about how you approach it. And we'll do some things that are very structured, but we'll also do some things that are really just putting it out there for you to react to. So again, I would encourage you to visit that website. The College of Public Health, OSU's Office of Diversity and Inclusion have some great resources on their website, including articles and TED Talks and other podcasts. So however you learn, the information is there if you want to consume it and certainly interact with your faculty and your staff. I know many would welcome that conversation.
Yeah. One last comment, which is, I would love to see departments be intentional about inviting Black and Brown guest speakers and lecturers to their classes. It does a lot for representation for students of color as well as non-BIPOC students to see a face other than the majority working in that field. And I will just co-sign that. I remember giving a talk at University of California, Irvine a few years ago, and at the end, there was a post on Instagram by one of the second-year medical students that said, in my almost the end of my 2 years of school, I'd never seen a woman of color speak at the podium in my medical school, and was kind of shocked about what that meant and what that felt like for her. And since then, I've really thought a lot about that, and that doesn't happen by accident. You've got to be really intentional about it, and really the onus is on us to make sure that we are creating visibility and creating opportunities for people to see the rich diversity that we have in medicine and in all the health professions. And so, yes, I think that's a very important part of what we're talking about. Representation and the patient simulations matters. Representation and who's lecturing and who's at the table and having conversations matters. So I want to just take a moment. I know we're out of time, and just thank you all for attending and for the great thoughts. We will capture and catalog all these and make sure they get to the right work groups. Thank you for helping Autumn and I think through as we steer this oversight committee, all the things that we should be making sure we're focused on and we don't miss. But thank you most of all to our student organizers, Rosevine, Thomas, all the rest of you that have been behind the scenes creating a week that you've really led by example. I mean, I don't know if the faculty and staff could have done it any better than the students have. And thank you so much for responding in this moment by bringing so many people together to learn new things and to share our stories and to hear from so many faculty, staff, and other leaders that you don't normally hear from. We're so impressed with you, really appreciate you, and hope that you'll stay in touch as we move this forward. Autumn, anything you want to say as we close?
No, thank you all so much.
All right, have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Hey, Rose, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, I'm going to stop